The Perfect Husband, or The Perfect Lie. On December 24th of 2002, Christmas Eve, a pregnant woman named Laci Peterson vanished. At first, it appeared to be a missing person case, but as days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, that assumption began to collapse, because this was not just a disappearance. It would become one of the most debated criminal cases in modern American history. And at the center of it was the person closest to her husband, Scott Peterson. On that morning in Modesto, California, Laci Peterson, 27 years old and 8 months pregnant, was last seen inside her home. It was an ordinary day, a quiet neighborhood, no signs of forced entry, no immediate evidence of a struggle. According to Scott Peterson, he left the house to go fishing at Berkeley Marina. He told investigators that Laci was alive when he walked out the door. But when he returned home later that day, everything had changed. Laci was gone. Her car was still in the driveway. Her purse was still inside the house. Nothing appeared disturbed. At 5:47 p.m., Laci Peterson was officially reported missing. At first, the case moved like many missing person investigations. Search efforts began. Volunteers gathered. Flyers were distributed. Hope was still present. But very quickly, something began to feel wrong. Not because of evidence, but because of inconsistencies. Investigators began reviewing Scott Peterson's statements, and small contradictions started to appear. There were reports of changing accounts involving fishing and golfing, details that didn't fully align, a recently purchased boat that had not been clearly disclosed. None of these elements proved guilt, but together, they created uncertainty, and uncertainty in an investigation creates pressure. Then, just 6 days after Laci disappeared, the case shifted dramatically. On December 30th, 2002, a woman named Amber Frey contacted police. She revealed that she had been in a relationship with Scott Peterson. According to her statement, Scott had told her that he was unmarried. But what stood out most was something else, a statement that would later echo throughout the trial. He allegedly told her that this would be his first Christmas without his wife. This was before Laci was even reported missing publicly. That detail changed everything. At the same time, investigators began analyzing behavior. Scott Peterson appeared calm, composed, controlled. He did not display the level of visible distress that many expected. But this raises an important question. What does grief look like? Because behavior is not evidence, and perception can be misleading. Some people shut down emotionally, others react outwardly. There is no single correct response. But in high-profile cases, behavior often becomes part of the narrative. Meanwhile, the timeline itself remained unclear. Several witnesses reported seeing a pregnant woman walking a dog on the morning of December 24th, between approximately 9:45 and 10:00 a.m. But those sightings were never confirmed. The identity of the woman was never proven, which left investigators with a critical uncertainty. Was Laci Peterson alive after Scott left the house? That question has never been definitively answered. By March 2003, the investigation changed direction. The case was officially reclassified as a homicide. This marked a shift from searching to building a case, from possibility to suspicion. Then came the discovery that would define the investigation. In April 2003, along the shoreline of the San Francisco Bay, a fetus was found. The following day, additional remains were recovered. They were later identified as Laci Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. The location mattered because it was near the same area where Scott Peterson had said he went fishing. This geographic connection became one of the strongest links in the case. Just days later, on April 18th of 2003, Scott Peterson was arrested. At the time of his arrest, several details were noted. He had dyed his hair, he was carrying cash, and he had multiple identification documents. To investigators, this suggested possible intent to flee. But again, Interpretation is not confirmation. Intent was not definitively proven. The charges were severe. First-degree murder for Laci Peterson. Second-degree murder for Connor Peterson. The trial began in June 2004, and almost immediately, it became a national event. Media coverage was constant. Every detail was analyzed. Every movement was discussed. Public opinion began forming long before the verdict, and this created a unique environment because the case was not only being tried in a courtroom, it was being tried in the court of public perception. The prosecution's case relied entirely on circumstantial evidence. There was no direct evidence, no eyewitness, no confirmed murder weapon. Instead, they built a narrative based on connection, behavior, and probability. They presented motive, an extramarital relationship, a desire for a different life, an escape from responsibility. They presented opportunity, a timeline where Scott Peterson was alone, unaccounted for, and they presented location. The bodies were found near the same area where he claimed to be fishing. They also introduced forensic detail, a single hair, consistent with Laci Peterson, found on a tool inside the boat. A small detail, but in a circumstantial case, small details matter. The defense responded with equal force. They argued that there was no direct evidence, no confirmed time of death, no clear sequence of events. They proposed an alternative theory that Laci may have been abducted, possibly connected to a burglary in the neighborhood, but this theory was never confirmed. Inside the courtroom, something else was happening. Jurors were not only hearing evidence, they were watching behavior, listening to tone, observing presence, and this introduces a critical psychological layer. In high-profile trials, perception can shape interpretation. Media coverage amplifies certain details. Public narratives begin to form, and once a narrative takes hold, it becomes difficult to separate perception from proof. Scott Peterson's demeanor became central to that perception. Some saw his calmness as suspicious. Others saw it as emotional restraint. That divide still exists today. Testimony from Amber Frey became a key moment. Her account reinforced the prosecution's argument regarding motive. Her recorded conversations with Scott added weight to the narrative. By November 2004, the jury reached a verdict. Scott Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder for Laci and guilty of second-degree murder for Connor. In 2005, he was sentenced to death, but the legal process did not end. In 2020, the death sentence was overturned, and in 2021, he was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Even now, the case remains controversial because despite the conviction, key questions remain. There is no confirmed time of death, no confirmed method, and no fully verified sequence of events. In recent years, there have been reports of requests for additional DNA testing, but final conclusions from those efforts are not confirmed. So what is established? Laci Peterson and her unborn son Connor died. Scott Peterson was convicted in court, but what remains unresolved is how exactly it happened, and that uncertainty is what keeps this case alive, because this case exists in a space between two things, proof and certainty, and sometimes the most unsettling cases are not the ones with no answers, but the ones where the answers are still questioned.